Have you ever wondered what it's like to witness an event so catastrophic that it changes the course of history forever? The world has experienced disasters so devastating that they have left deep scars on societies, economies, and human existence. From natural catastrophes to man-made tragedies, these events serve as haunting reminders of how fragile life can be. With every disaster, countless lives are lost, and the aftermath leaves entire nations grappling with the weight of recovery. Why do some of these disasters remain etched in our collective memory, while others slowly fade away? Let's dive into the grim chapters of human history where disaster reigned supreme. The violent eruption of Mount Vesuvius, 79 AD. The ancient city of Pompeii was no stranger to the rumblings of Mount Vesuvius. Still, no one could have foreseen the violent eruption that would bury the city under a thick layer of volcanic ash in mere hours. This was no ordinary eruption. It was one of the deadliest in history. On a warm August day, Vesuvius erupted with such ferocity that ash, pumice, and toxic gases spewed miles into the air. Residents were caught off guard as molten rock rained down, choking the life out of thousands. The entire city was entombed in ash, and those who did not flee in time were forever frozen in time, their final moments preserved as ash-covered casts. Can you picture the terror they must have felt as the sky turned black, the air became unbreathable, and the earth trembled beneath their feet? The aftermath left a ghost town, a stark reminder of the unpredictable power of nature. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351. Perhaps no disaster in history has had such a profound effect on the global population as the Black Death. It was a pandemic that swept through Europe, killing an estimated 25 million people in just 4 years, approximately a third of the continent's population. Unlike an isolated catastrophe like a volcano or an earthquake, this disaster seemed to follow no predictable pattern. It crept silently through towns and villages, with every cough or touch possibly sealing a person's fate. What's more horrifying than watching the world around you collapse as neighbors, friends, and loved ones die from an invisible killer? The Black Death wiped out so much of the population that it reshaped entire economies, triggering widespread labor shortages and forever altering European society. The 2004 Indian Ocean Tsunami. On December 26, 2004, the Earth quaked under the Indian Ocean with a magnitude of 9.1, one of the largest ever recorded. But the earthquake itself was just the beginning. What followed was a deadly tsunami, with towering waves up to 100 feet high, racing toward coastal regions. Indonesia, Thailand, India, and Sri Lanka were hit hardest, but the devastation spread across 14 countries. In minutes, entire communities were wiped out. Houses, businesses, and lives were swept away by the sheer force of the ocean. The death toll: more than 230,000 people. The sheer scale of this disaster left families searching for loved ones, some of whom were never found. In its wake, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami sparked a worldwide humanitarian effort, with aid pouring in from every corner of the globe. The Chernobyl disaster, 1986. Disasters aren't always natural. Sometimes human error brings about catastrophes of unimaginable scale. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 is a prime example of this. What started as a routine safety test in a Soviet nuclear power plant quickly escalated into the worst nuclear accident in history. An explosion in Reactor 4 released a massive amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere, and the consequences were catastrophic. Pripyat, the town closest to the plant, was evacuated, but the people were exposed to radiation before they were moved to safety. The long-term effects are still felt today: cancers, genetic mutations, and contamination of vast areas of land. But what truly made Chernobyl terrifying was its invisibility. Radiation is something you can't see, smell, or touch, and yet it was everywhere. Even today, the site remains one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Chernobyl is an example of how a single mistake can have consequences that last for centuries. The Great Chinese Famine, from 1959 to 1961. Most disasters are sudden: earthquakes, floods, fires, but some are slow-moving, creeping up on a nation and slowly strangling it. Such was the case with the Great Chinese Famine, a man-made disaster that occurred between 1959 and 1961. The Chinese government's Great Leap Forward aimed to rapidly industrialize the country, but it led to widespread mismanagement, agricultural failures, and an economic collapse. The result was famine on an unprecedented scale. It's estimated that anywhere between 15 to 45 million people died, not only from starvation but also from brutal government crackdowns on those trying to survive. The Great Chinese Famine remains one of the most tragic examples of how human policies, rather than natural forces, can lead to disaster on an unimaginable scale. The 2010 Haiti earthquake. On January 12, 2010, the small Caribbean nation of Haiti was struck by a catastrophic earthquake measuring 7.0 on the Richter scale. What made this disaster particularly tragic wasn't just the magnitude of the quake, but the vulnerability of Haiti itself. Already one of the poorest nations in the world, Haiti was ill-prepared to handle such a calamity. Over 200,000 people lost their lives in the earthquake, and more than 1.5 million were displaced from their homes. Buildings crumbled, roads cracked, and the nation was left in ruins. Despite an outpouring of international aid, recovery has been slow, and the scars of this disaster remain visible today. But why was Haiti so vulnerable? A combination of poor infrastructure, weak governance, and widespread poverty made the earthquake's impact far worse than it would have been in other regions. Even today, Haiti struggles to rebuild and recover. The Spanish flu pandemic from 1918 to 1919. In 1918, as World War I came to an end, another disaster loomed, one that would claim far more lives than the war itself. The Spanish flu pandemic swept across the globe, infecting an estimated 500 million people, about a third of the world's population, and killing between 50 to 100 million. This pandemic was swift and deadly, and unlike most strains of the flu, it seemed to target healthy young adults rather than the elderly and infirm. Hospitals were overwhelmed, medical supplies ran out, and entire communities were decimated. The world was ill-prepared for a pandemic of this scale, and it forced societies to confront the terrifying reality of global health crises. Why do we rarely talk about the Spanish flu compared to other disasters? Perhaps it's because the pandemic occurred at the tail end of a war that had already caused so much death and destruction. But its impact cannot be overstated as it reshaped public health systems and changed the way nations responded to future epidemics. The Fukushima disaster, 2011. The Fukushima disaster in Japan, much like Chernobyl, was a nuclear catastrophe. But this one wasn't entirely man-made. It was the result of a massive earthquake, followed by a tsunami that overwhelmed the safety protocols at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The earthquake struck on March 11, 2011, with a magnitude of 9.0. It triggered a tsunami that disabled the power supply and cooling systems of 3 Fukushima reactors. Radiation leaked, forcing hundreds of thousands to evacuate their homes. Although the full extent of the radiation exposure's long-term effects remains uncertain, it's clear that this disaster will haunt Japan for generations. Disasters force us to ask hard questions. How can we prepare for the unknown? How can we better protect vulnerable communities? And will we ever truly learn from the past, or are we doomed to repeat it? One thing is certain: the disasters of the past will not be the last. There will always be new challenges, new threats, and new catastrophes that test the resilience of humanity. The question is, will we be ready?